park and into the large wetland that filters the Mara River naturally as it enters Lake Victoria and begins its second journey at the headwaters of the Nile River. But it also hosts nearly 1 million people, many of whom are rural poor, lacking access to water and sanitation facilities, and who rely directly on the water and the ecosystem services provided by a healthy Mara River. So the fundamental challenge that we face in the Mara is to improve the livelihoods of these people through sustainable development of the natural resources of the basin, but without compromising the integrity of the ecosystem upon which they depend. Some of the trade-offs that come with development include massive land use change, which has been happening in the upper catchment, including deforestation of the mound, increasing irrigation for agriculture, increasing amounts of legal and illegal abstractions in the basin, and increasing levels of pollution. All of these things threaten the quantity and quality of water depended on by both the people in the basin as well as the iconic wildlife that makes this basin so famous. So with that background, to guide the efforts in the Mara River Basin to deal with this fundamental challenge, these two assessments were carried out: a biodiversity strategy and action plan and an environmental flow assessment. Both of these are very unique processes for several reasons. First of all, they're highly participatory. So an environmental flow assessment was carried out in the Mara Basin that called upon multiple Kenyan and Tanzanian specialists to determine minimal sustainable flows for the river. The team of specialists did this by reviewing historical information about the river, relying on the resource quality objectives that were determined by water managers for the basin, and going out into the field to measure flow requirements of critical indicator species. So these included fish, aquatic insects, riparian vegetation, and most importantly, the needs of the communities dependent upon the river system. These indicators serve as a canary in the coal mine, as they say. My grandfather was a coal miner in the U.S., and in the old days, miners would carry a small bird inside of a cage with them into the mines and determine if there were any toxic gases present that could kill them. Because the bird was much more sensitive to these gases than the people were, if the bird died, the miners knew that they were in trouble and they needed to escape. These are our canaries in the coal mine. These critical indicators in the river are more sensitive to changes in water quantity and quality than we are. But we can watch them carefully, and if they start to die, we know that we're also in trouble. So here's a graph of the results that the team of specialists arrived at. I want to take a minute to talk through this. In blue, we have the average amount of water available in the system according to the hydrological record. So you can see the high flows that are associated with the long rains from March to June, and you can also see the low flow that come during the dry season from February. In red, we have the reserve flow recommendations that were recommended by the specialists. This has been made to account for minimum sustainable flows at critical points in the hydrograph in a way that mirrors the natural highs and lows of the river. We can compare these two graphs then to get a first estimate of the amount of water available for abstraction. So the good news about this graph is that during the wet season of years with normal rainfall, there's plenty of water available for abstraction in the basin. However, during dry season, much less water is available. And the situation during drought years is quite different. The amount required by the reserve is lower, but the amount naturally available in the system is also lower, and even becomes critical at some points. In fact, the assessment found that in the upper catchment, reserve flows are currently not being met during drought years, which is a sign of a decline in the health of the river basin. So this data is a very significant development for water resources management in the Mara River Basin and really in East Africa, because these recommendations are real numbers about the required reserve flows in this system. They're the outcome of a robust and widely applied process that involves multiple experts, and they can be applied by water resource managers on the ground. And in fact, ongoing monitoring has supported these recommendations. we actually documented the river falling below the threshold recommendations of the reserve. This is a picture of the Mara flowing at 1 cubic meter per second, which is half of the reserve flow recommendation for this time period, but still greater than the fallback reserve requirement known as Q95. These dramatically low flows resulted in a sharp decline in water quality, which was associated with typhoid outbreaks among the river-dependent communities in the upper catchment, and a large and widespread fish kill in the middle and lower catchment, which impacted even those species we hadn't identified as being sensitive. So this to us is a very powerful signal that there are some critical declines in the health of the Mara River Basin and action needs to be taken. The primary recommendation of the environmental flow assessment is for water managers to implement the reserve flow recommendations by not permitting abstractions above the amount available. But in order to do this, we have to keep monitoring of flow levels and the abstractions so we know how much is available in the system and how much is already being taken out. We also need to increase the ability of resource managers and grassroots users to be able to undertake this monitoring and protect reserve flows. And we need to make better use of the water that we have available in the system. We can do this by thinking of creative, sustainable ways to increase off-channel storage, to take advantage of those higher wet season flows to carry us through the dry season so we don't keep taxing the river. And we have to address land use change in the upper catchment. When natural land cover is lost, the rainfall that does come runs off quickly, carrying topsoil and contaminants with it. The result, which we found in the Mara, is higher peak flows and lower low flows. By implementing soil conservation practices and reforesting degraded lands, such as the kind of activities that our Honorable Minister Lakesa was engaged in today, we can improve the natural recharge capability of the system. And finally, we need to engage in continued monitoring of the system. Although we have a good concrete figures for the reserve flows, the real uncertainty lies in the amount of water available for abstraction, and we need to monitor this closely to ensure that we have sufficient quantity and quality of water, both for the people and the wildlife that depend on it in the basin. Thank you very much.